Hi and welcome to Knit with Hannah. I'm Hannah. Today we're going to knit up a sample square, also known as a gauge swatch. Hi and welcome to Knit with Hannah. I'm Hannah. I'm here with Knitting Natter to help you learn to knit the easy way. Yes, if you've been part of the declutter, you may have all of this yarn sitting around and you're thinking, what do I knit with it? I don't have patterns that go with it. I'm not really sure what size, what weight, what thickness it is, which needles do I use with it. What I would suggest is just knitting up something small. Knitting up a sample square is an ideal option. You get a feel for the yarn. How does it feel when you're knitting with it? How does it knit up? Is it an ideal yarn for particular projects and not for others? Let's get that tutorial going now.
So let's knit up our sample square. We're going to use the Rowan Big Wool. Now this is Rowan Big Wool. I have leftovers of it and it's just to test the needles, it's to test the size, so I don't have to start a new wool. What we're going to do is use this top pattern here that we created in a previous video. So first things first is to cast on 21 stitches. You've probably seen me cast on before, but let's go through it anyway. So we're going to create a slip knot first, and that is done this way. We use the short end of yarn and we wind that around the fingers near the tips and then near the knuckles. We then pick up one of the needles and the needle tip goes underneath the first stitch and then over the second stitch, and we pull that second loop through. There we go. And then when you pull on the short end, you have the slip knot sat there on your needle. Okay, so we're now going to knit with the yarn that goes to the ball. Okay, so let's cast on 21 stitches. We're going to put that right hand needle into the stitch that's on the left hand needle. The yarn goes around the tip of the right hand needle. Pull that through with the right hand needle, and then we move the left hand needle to the front of that stitch and put it on the needle. Now instead of going into the stitch, we go in between the previous two stitches. So the right hand needle goes in between those stitches, the yarn goes around the tip of the right hand needle, we pull that loop through, and then from the side that's next to you, you put the tip left hand needle into that stitch and it goes onto the left hand needle. So needle goes in between the previous two stitches, yarn goes around, pull that loop through and put it onto this needle. So we have 4 stitches, 5, I'm just going to keep on doing this all the way along, 6, 21 stitches, 5, 10, 15, 21. I always count my stitches in 5s. It just makes it feel easier. And I remember what number I'm at as well in case I get interrupted. So we're going to knit 6 rows. You can do moss stitch 6 rows. You'll have a different depth to it, but let's do this. And if this doesn't work, you can say, I'm just going to do another row or 1 fewer rows, and this isn't kind of a roundabout. This is the kind of thing that you want. It's giving us an idea. So we're going to knit 6 rows. You know the knit stitch by now. Needle goes into the front of that stitch, yarn goes around, pull that loop through, and the stitch on the left hand needle is discarded, taken off of the needle. In, around, pull that loop through and discard the stitch. So what I've actually decided is that these 4 rows of knitting actually are good enough for a border. That's a good stable base to it. And I've just done the first row of stocking stitch. Now what you must remember is that this stocking stitch has 3 stitches at the front and the end of the row being garter stitch. So always knit those first 3 stitches no matter which row you're on. So I'm just going to do that now. The first row of stocking stitch is all knitted, of course. So I'm going to knit 3 stitches, and then I'm going to purl 3 stitches. And of course, purling means that you move the yarn from the back to the front of the right hand needle, and the needle goes into the stitch from the opposite direction. It goes from right to left. The yarn goes around that right hand needle, pull that loop through just as before, and drop the stitch off of the left hand needle. So in from the right to the left, yarn goes around, pull that loop through and discard the stitch off of the left hand needle. And we do the same all the way along that row. And then when we've got 3 stitches left, we switch back to knitting. I know it's confusing if we have knit stitches and purl stitches and then we talk about knitting as the whole thing. So there you go. It's just something we have to get used to. So now we've got 3 stitches left on the left hand needle. We knit those 3 stitches for the border. And I have a feeling that 4 row border will match up better with the 3 stitch border. You see, if we were doing moss stitch, you might have chosen to do things differently. It's just a case of seeing what it looks like. This isn't laid out in stone, is it? I've written it in pencil on a piece of paper. So you haven't got to be exact. Like I said, I'm just changing it because I feel like it. So here we go. Now the next row of stocking stitch with the border is, of course, knitting the first 3 stitches, knitting all the way into the last 3 stitches, and knitting the last 3 stitches. Guess what? That means you're knitting the whole row. So that's what I'm doing here. Okay, so this is my first row of the border, and I will see how it looks. I may only do 4 or 5 rows, just as I did at the beginning. I think it will be 4, and then I'll cast it off. Because this is quite a strong yarn, it's more than happy to sit in place without rolling at the bottom there, so it will very likely be very similar at the top. The thicker the yarn, the less likely it's going to be a big roll at the bottom and the sides. That's my experience, but even just a couple of rows of garter stitch will help prevent that. So I'm just casting off here. So knit 2, and then move the first stitch over the second. Knit one more and knit the first stitch over the second. Knit another one and pass the first stitch over the second. Then we do that all the way across the row, pass the first stitch over the second, and that means that you'll only have 2 or 1 stitches on the right hand needle at once. There we are. You can see how much we've knitted, what the difference is there between the yarn that we started with and the yarn that we finished with in that ball. So we have our square now, and what I'm going to do is measure that here just to show you. We have 6 inches of measuring. So what you can see here is that over 15 stitches we get 6 inches of fabric, and over 4 we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.5. So it is sometimes better to have that extra length just so you know where you're going. And we should have 6 inches going up and down as well. And that is 20 rows. 20 rows giving 6 inches as well. So you have a really good idea of how many stitches and how many rows you'll have per 10 centimetres. Does that match up with the pattern that you're knitting? Does that match up with the fabric and the knit that you want to create? If you're knitting a scarf or something, just putting stitches on the needle, do you think you'll have enough yarn? What you can do is calculate how many stitches are in this, weigh this, and then you'll know whether you've got enough yarn for a whole scarf, something like that. It could easily be done. So there you are. This is your sample square.
Okay, so I hope that's made it easy for you. You can now knit up swatches and just think about how you want to use this. This can be used if you want to check the gauge of your knitting, and that is to say whether, oh, I'm knitting too tight, maybe I should use a slightly larger needle so the fabric is more like the designer suggested. And the other option might be that you're knitting too loosely, so the stitches are too far apart. You can knit up another swatch with a thinner needle and see whether it fits better. If you want to find out more about substituting yarn, about the more technical sides of swatching and choosing yarns to substitute, then do go and have a look at the intuitive knitting course that I have over on the Knit with Hannah Academy. The intuitive knitting course guides you through step by step substituting yarn, and it will just help you figure out whether you actually want to substitute yarn and how you can substitute yarn if you do. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'll leave the link for intuitive knitting course down below, and yes, if you're part of the yarn declutter or not, then you'll have lots of ideas about which yarns you want to knit with next anyway. And if you're not part of the yarn declutter, I'll leave the link to join that below as well. You can catch up on all the previous lessons and all the previous videos there too. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'll see you again soon. Bye for now. Happy knitting.